Hi, it's Maya here, and this is my top 10 favorite books. This video is something I've been planning to do quite a long while, ever since I started my channel. As a matter of fact, Bree from Stories from the Shelf asked me on Twitter what were my favorite books, so I decided that it was high time to film this video. These books are in no particular order, because I couldn't put them in any order of preference, even if I tried. It's just impossible. I'm going to start with the one that you probably all know is one of my favorite books, because I've talked about it so much on this channel, which is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This beast of a book takes place in Regency England around the Napoleonic Wars, and in this reality England has a magical past, but no one does practical magic anymore, and it is these two gentlemen who restore magic to England. I love the writing style, which reads like a book actually written during that time, and I love the characters, my favorite being the antagonist, a fairy only referred to as the gentleman with the thistledown hair. Number 2, I have Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This was the first urban fantasy book that I read. I had only read high fantasy books before this one, and it just blew my mind, this idea that these magical fantasy creatures could exist in our reality, right in our cities. This book tells of Richard, who moves from Scotland to London and helps a homeless girl he meets on the street. This causes Richard to fall down through the cracks to London below, a London beneath our London in its underground stations and tunnels and sewers. I really loved how the book used those underground stations as magical locations, and when I visited London for the first time I was ridiculously excited just to visit the different stations that are mentioned in this book, like Blackfriars or Knightsbridge. My favorite character from this book is Marquis de Carabas, because I just love those unpredictable trickster types. Number 3, A Storm of Swords by George R. Martin. This is my favorite book from A Song of Ice and Fire. I won't go into much detail because this is the third book from the series, but so much happens in this book. There were so many twists and turns right up until that curveball of an epilogue. My favorite characters to follow in this series changed from book to book, but in this one my favorites were Catelyn Stark and Daenerys Targaryen. Number 4, Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. In this book, the vampire Louis tells his life story to a reporter. His story starts in New Orleans with how he was changed into a vampire. This New Orleans part, which is the first half of the story, is the strongest part in this novel, although the rest is by no means bad. The last time I read this, I read the New Orleans part in one sitting because I just couldn't stop. My favorite character from this book is, of course, the vampire Lestat, who is so unpredictable and interesting and so full of himself. The next book is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is a story of timid Sophie who gets cursed and turns into an old woman, and she sort of hires herself as a cleaning lady in Wizard Howl's Moving Castle. This is my go-to feel-good book, and the Vane Howl is my favorite character. The Miyazaki animated movie differs a lot from this, but my favorite scene, which is Howl taking a bath and accidentally dyeing his hair and thinking it's the end of the world, it was in the movie. Then we move on to this beast, the Sandman graphic novel series by Neil Gaiman. This is the first volume in the Absolute Sandman editions. There's 4 of these chunksters. In my opinion, this is Neil Gaiman's masterpiece, and I actually haven't loved any of his novels, with the exception of Neverwhere, quite as much as these graphic novels. This is the story of one of the Endless Dream, and he's a really great character. There's a lot of great characters in this book. It starts with a more of a horror fantasy feeling, and it takes a while to find its stride, but when it does, it turns into more of a mythological fantasy. A lot of characters from different things, like the religions around the world. My favorite character from the Endless themselves is the titular Sandman, also called Morpheus or Dream. And from the other characters, I love Loki, yes, that Loki from the Scandinavian mythology, and Lucien, who is the Dream's librarian, but there's a ton of different great characters in this series, and I can't choose a favorite. Sandman is a 10-volume series, and my favorite volume is The Season of Mists, which I own as a separate book because of this. Robin Hobb is one of my favorite characters, and I couldn't choose just one book from her as my favorite, but I chose my favorite trilogy of hers, which is the Tawny Man Trilogy. This is the further adventures of Fitzgerald the Farseer and the Fool from the Farseer trilogy. And the Fool is one of 2 of my favorite characters from anything ever. Next I have another graphic novel, which I've also talked a lot about in my channel, which is the Courtney Crumrin series, and the second volume, The Coven of Mystics by Ted Nafee. This is a lovely middle-grade YA fantasy series about a grumpy preteen girl and some fairies and a magical town and her great-uncle Aloysius, who is a warlock. I've done a separate video of this series in my channel, and I'm going to link that down below. We're nearing the end, and I have a couple of non-fantasy books, lo and behold. The first of those is The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. I love historical France and I love musketeers. The musketeers aren't quite as heroic as they're sometimes portrayed. They can be idiots, and some of the stuff they do isn't actually that morally sound, but that's part of the reason why I love them. My favorite musketeer is Aramis because how he cares for his looks and how he goes between wanting to join the priesthood and want to continue with the musketeers. And finally I have Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, and this is a book I read whenever I'm feeling a bit bittersweet or sad. It tells of Mikage Sakurai, who has been raised by her grandparents, and at the start of the book her grandmother has just died and she needs to find some new living arrangements. She moves in with this boy who worked in a flower shop where her grandmother visited a lot, and this boy's mother. It's wonderfully written in a way that makes me feel sort of calm. I've only read the Finnish translation, so I don't know if that atmosphere is carried over to the English translation. And the main character loves kitchens, which is why this is called Kitchen. So those were my 10 favorite books. I have a bit of a bubbling understack here, and I'm just going to show you them pretty quickly. They are Hark, a Vagrant by Kate Beaton, a series of historical and literary comic strips. Deadbeat, the 7th Dresden Files novel by Jim Butcher, the one with zombies. I like these books in the middle of the Dresden Files series more than the early ones or the later ones from Changes and Beyond. Naive Super by Erland Lowe, which is a wonderfully naively written book about our main character who goes through a bit of a personal crisis. The Scott Pilgrim series by Brian Lee O'Malley, a lovely graphic novel series about a band with quite a lot of fantastical elements also thrown in. The movie based on these is also great. Moominpakpas Memoirs by Tove Jansson. I love the Moomin books and it was pretty hard to choose my favorite, but I remember I liked this the most when I was a kid. My other favorites are Finn Family Moomin Troll and Moomin Summer Madness. So there you go, my top 10 favorite books. Are some of these your favorites also? If so, talk to me in the comments. This might turn out to be quite of a long video even after edit, so I really hope you enjoyed it, especially because I suffered a paper cut for you from Moominpakpas Memoirs.